Chapter 8, Part 1 of Fanny Herself. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. Chapter 8, Part 1. You can come down now. They're all here, I guess. Dr. Thalmann's going to begin. Fanny, huddled in a chair in her bedroom, looked up into the plump, kindly face of the woman who was bending over her. Then she stood up, docilely, and walked toward the stairs with a heavy, stumbling step. "I'd put down my veil if I were you," said the neighbor woman, and reached up for the black folds that draped Fanny's hat. Fanny's fingers reached for them, too, fumblingly. "I'd forgotten about that," she said. The heavy crepe fell about her shoulders, mercifully hiding the swollen, discolored face. She went down the stairs. There was a little stir, a swaying toward her, a sibilant murmur of sympathy from the crowded sitting room as she passed into the parlor where Rabbi Thalmann stood waiting, prayer book in hand, in front of that which was covered with flowers. Fanny sat down. A feeling of unreality was strong upon her. Dr. Thalmann cleared his throat and opened the book. After all, it was not Rabbi Thalmann's funeral sermon that testified to Mrs. Brandeis's standing in the community. It was the character of the gathering that listened to what he had to say. Each had his own opinion of Molly Brandeis, and needed no final eulogy to confirm it. Father Fitzpatrick was there, tall, handsome, ruddy, the two wings of white showing at the temples, making him look more than ever like a leading man. He had been of those who had sat in what he called Mrs. Brandeis's confessional, there in the quiet little store. The two had talked of things theological and things earthly. His wit, quick though it was no match for hers, but they both had a humor sense and a drama sense, and one day they discovered, queerly enough, that they worshiped the same God. Any one of these things is basis enough for a friendship. Besides, Molly Brandeis could tell an Irish story inimitably, and you should have heard Father Fitzpatrick do the one about Ikey and the nickel. No, I think the Catholic priest, seeming to listen with such respectful attention, really heard very little of what Rabbi Thalmann had to say. Herman Walthers was there, he of the First National Bank of Winnebago, whose visits had once brought such terror to Molly Brandeis. Augustus G. Gerritsen was there, and three of his department heads. Emil Bauer sat just behind him. In a corner was Sadie, the erstwhile coquette, very subdued now, and months behind the fashions in everything but baby clothes. Hen Cody, who had done all of Molly Brandeis's draying, sat in unaccustomed black next to Mayor A. J. Dawes. Temple Emmanuel was there, almost a unit. The officers of Temple Emmanuel's Ladies' Aid Society sat in a row. They had never honored Molly Brandeis with office in the society, she who could have managed its business, politics, and social activities with one hand tied behind her, and both her bright eyes shut. In the kitchen and on the porch and in the hallway stood certain obscure people, women whose fingertips stuck out of their cotton gloves, and whose skirts dipped ludicrously in the back. Only Molly Brandeis could have identified them for you. Mrs. Brosh, the butter and egg woman, hovered in the dining room doorway. She had brought a pound of butter. It was her contribution to the funeral baked meats. She had deposited it furtively on the kitchen table. Bertie Callahan, head waitress at the Halley House, found a seat just next to the elegant Mrs. Morehouse, who led the golf club crowd. A haughty young lady in the dining room, Bertie Callahan, in her stiffly starched white, but beneath the icy crust of her hauteur was a molten mass of good humor and friendliness. She and Molly Brandeis had had much in common. But no one, not even Fanny Brandeis, ever knew who sent the great cluster of American Beauty roses that had come all the way from Milwaukee. There had been no card, so who could have guessed that they came from Blanche Devine? Blanche Devine, of the white powder and the minks and the diamonds and the high-heeled shoes and the plumes, lived in the house with the closed shutters near the freight depot. She often came into Brandeis's bazaar. Molly Brandeis had never allowed Sadie or Pearl or Fanny or Aloysius to wait on her. She had attended to her herself. And one day, for some reason, Blanche Devine found herself telling Molly Brandeis how she had come to be Blanche Devine, and it was a moving and terrible story. And now her cardless flowers, a great scarlet sheaf of them, lay next to the chaste white roses that had been sent by the Temple Emmanuel Ladies' Aid. Truly, death is a great leveler. In a vague way, Fanny seemed to realize that all these people were there. I think she must even have found a certain grim comfort in their presence. Hers had not been the dry-eyed grief of the strong, such as you read about. She had wept, night and day, hopelessly, inconsolably, torturing herself with remorseful questions. If she had not gone skating, might she not have seen how ill her mother was? Why hadn't she insisted on the doctor when her mother refused to eat the Christmas dinner? Blind and selfish, she told herself. Blind and selfish. Her face was swollen and distorted now, and she was thankful for the black veil that shielded her. Winnebago was scandalized to see that she wore no other black. Mrs. Brandeis had never wanted Fanny to wear it. She hadn't enough color, she said. So now she was dressed in her winter suit of blue, and her hat with the pert blue quill. And the little rabbi's voice went on, and Fanny knew that it could not be true. What had all this dust-to-dust talk to do with anyone as vital and electric and constructive as Molly Brandeis? In the midst of the service there was a sharp cry, and a little stir, and the sound of stifled sobbing. It was Aloysius the merry, Aloysius the faithful, whose Irish heart was quite broken. Fanny ground her teeth together in an effort at self-control. And so to the end, and out past the little hushed, respectful group on the porch, to the Jewish cemetery on the state road. The snow of Christmas week was quite virgin there, except for that one spot where the sexton and his men had been at work. Then back at a smart jog-trot through the early dusk of the winter afternoon, the carriage wheels creaking upon the hard, dry snow. And Fanny Brandeis said to herself, she must have been a little light-headed from hunger and weeping, "Now I'll know whether it's true or not. When I go into the house, if she's there, she'll say, 'Well, Fanchen, hungry?' Oh, but my little girl's hands are cold. Come here to the register and warm them. Oh, God, let her be there. Let her be there." But she wasn't. The house had been set to rights by brisk and unaccustomed hands. There was a bustle and stir in the dining room, and from the kitchen came the appetizing odors of cooking food. Fanny went up to a chair that was out of its place and shoved it back against the wall where it belonged. She straightened a rug, carried the wastebasket from the desk to the spot near the living room table where it had always served to hide the shabby worn place in the rug. Fanny went upstairs, past the room, that was once more just a comfortable, old-fashioned bedroom instead of a mysterious and awful chamber, bathed her face, tidied her hair, came downstairs again, ate and drank things hot and revivifying. The house was full of kindly women. Fanny found herself clinging to them, clinging desperately to these ample, broad-bosomed, soothing women whom she had scarcely known before. They were always there, those women, and their husbands, too, kindly, awkward men who patted her shoulder and who spoke of Molly Brandeis with that sincerity of admiration such as men usually give only to men. People were constantly popping in at the back door with napkin-covered trays and dishes and baskets. A wonderful and beautiful thing, that homely, small-town sympathy that knows the value of physical comfort in the time of spiritual anguish. 2 days after the funeral, Fanny Brandeis went back to the store, much as her mother had done many years before, after her husband's death. She looked about at the bright, well-stocked shelves and tables with a new eye, a speculative eye. The Christmas season was over. January was the time for inventory and for replenishment. Mrs. Brandeis had always gone to Chicago the second week in January for the spring stock. But something was forming in Fanny Brandeis's mind, a resolve that grew so rapidly as to take her breath away. Her brain felt strangely clear and keen after the crashing storm of grief that had shaken her during the past week. "What are you going to do now?" people had asked her, curious and interested. "Is Theodore coming back?" "I don't know yet," in answer to the first. And, "No, why should he? He has his work." "But he could be of such help to you." "I'll help myself," said Fanny Brandeis, and smiled a curious smile that had in it more of bitterness and less of mirth than any smile has a right to have. Mrs. Brandeis left a will, far-sighted businesswoman that she was. It was a terse, clear-headed document that gave to Fanny Brandeis, my daughter, the $6,000 insurance, the stock, goodwill, and fixtures of Brandeis's Bazaar, the house furnishings, the few pieces of jewelry in their old fashioned